Are you thinking of buying a climbing plant? Particularly if you've got a slightly smaller garden. Climbing plants hugely increase the space you've got for flowers or even for growing fruit and vegetables. But there are 5 questions you need to ask before actually paying out money to buy a climbing plant. It's Alexandra here from the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog. And the reason why these 5 questions are so important is because before you take on a climbing plant, you need to decide how much work you're going to do to maintain it. I asked garden designer Posy Gentles what climbers she recommends for her clients, and she said it really is important to know how much they're prepared to maintain them. There's no plant in the world that is no maintenance. All plants will need some maintenance. And equally, even the most high maintenance climbers often only need pruning 2 or 3 times a year. But of course with a climber that may involve ladders, and so it's really worth thinking about what you want and why you want it. So what are these 5 questions? I'll go into more detail about each one of them as the video goes on. But they are the 5 are: 1. Is your climber going to be planted in sun or shade? This is so important. 2. How big is your climber going to get? 3. Is your climber slow growing or fast growing? 4. How does your climber climb? Will it twine? Does it have suckers or aerial roots, or will it need full support? And 5, which is the least important, although it's the one we all think about, is what are the flowers like? So firstly, is your climbing plant going to be in sun or shade? Most people understand that if you plant a climber in actual shade, there's a building that shades it all the time, or it's underneath a porch, it is in the shade. But the actual slightly sneaky thing is that if you've got a completely open wall or fence and it's north facing, that is also shade. And one of the commonest mistakes that people make is that they plant a climber against a north-facing wall, and what it does is it shoots up the wall and fence, and then it flowers with the neighbour's garden because that's the south-facing side. And although some clematises do like shade, this particular one is a great one for scrambling into the sun. So how big is the climber going to get? Now, when you buy a climber, it's probably going to be 18 inches or 2 feet high. I mean, it'll be a tiny little thing. And the idea that this could be 40 feet in every direction in 3 or 4 years' time is unimaginable. But actually some will. And I've certainly had real problems with climbers that have just gone too far, too fast. I planted a Banksia rose once, and Banksia is a really, really fast-growing and it goes for quite a long way, and it makes a great deal of bulk, and it went over a trellis, and of course it created a sort of sail effect, and both the Banksia rose and the trellis came down in a high wind, whereas if I'd chosen a much more modest climbing rose for that trellis, it would still be up there. And this leads on to, of course, how fast-growing or slow-growing is your climber going to be? The advantage of a slow-growing climber is that although it will take several years, maybe even 5 years, to cover the area that you'd like it to cover, you won't have to prune it or maintain it as much once it gets to that stage. The advantage of a fast-growing climber is that you get the effect really quickly. In a year or 2, you'll have quite a lot of coverage. But from then onwards, you will have to cut it back often twice a year. Wisteria is a very fast-growing climber, and it needs pruning twice a year and may also need more cutting back on top of that. Now, if your wisteria is really tall and it's going up to the first floor, then that may involve ladders. So that is why wisteria is quite a commitment. It's the most beautiful plant, but it is a commitment. And then the next question, of course, is how does your climber climb? Will it twine around a pole or trellis, or does it have little suckers or aerial roots that will cling to a wall? And if so, will it damage that wall? Or is it something that you need to tie in? Wisteria is an example of a plant that climbs and twines round something. And because it's a very strong plant, you need something quite sturdy, like a pole or trellis, or really something quite strong. Because the stems of wisteria that twine around the trellis will slowly become branches, and they'll become bigger and thicker, and actually I think rather beautiful, but they will become part of the trellis. So if there's any point at which you need to take the wisteria down, you will also have to replace the trellis because you won't be able to cut it out. Having said that, it takes quite a long time. It would take about 10 years probably for the wisteria to get that thick and gnarled, and the trellis might be on the way out by then anyway. So it's not the end of the world, it's just something to bear in mind. But also the twiners, like wisteria, are quite capable of twining around guttering, and if you're not keeping them under control, they could pull the guttering down. If your plant climbs with suckers or aerial roots, then it clings to the wall or fence, so you won't always have to supply much in the way of support. However, this can damage walls and fences. The Royal Horticultural Society says that ivy, for example, which is well known as a clinger, is unlikely to damage walls that are in good condition. But actually, like many people, I live in an older house, so I don't feel that I can really call my walls as being in good condition at any time. So although we do have ivy growing up walls in various places, we do keep a very close eye on it, and we do make sure it doesn't get out of hand. So I would definitely suggest that you could put ivy on trellises, for example, or wooden fences, because ivy is a fantastic plant for wildlife. We've got a Virginia creeper behind us. It's a Parthenocissus henryana, or Boston ivy, and it's not as fast growing as the usual Virginia creeper, and it goes up the wall with little tiny suckers, and that hasn't damaged the wall. And the Royal Horticultural Society in the UK says that Virginia creeper is very, very unlikely to damage any wall or fence. In fact, there is some evidence to suggest that it might even protect a wall from the worst of, say, pollution and wind and so on. I have known in the past that builders or decorators will say, oh, you can't have that climber on the wall, it's damaging your house. And that's probably not always true, but I'd suggest that you check quite carefully. And one thing, of course, that it is it does make it very difficult to maintain the wall. So if your wall or fence needs a lot of maintenance, you probably need a climber that you can actually cut down to the ground every year, or which will be fine if you do cut it down to the ground. Wisteria, for example, can be cut down quite severely and then it'll grow up again. And there are some clematisses that have to be cut to 12 inches above the ground every winter. If you have to do regular maintenance on your wall or fence, you could of course consider annual climbers, things like morning glory or sweet peas. And then there are the climbers which actually need full support. They need wires, they need to be tied in regularly. Things like climbing roses come into this, but also wall shrubs. The thing to consider about wall shrubs, however, is that they often take up more space in the ground than real climbers do. So if you buy a climbing rose or a wisteria or a clematis, then it will take up hardly any space in your border. So if you've got a small garden, those are very good climbers. Whereas if you're going to use a wall shrub like a ceanothus or a pyracantha, that is likely to take up more space on the ground. My most easy care climber is a hardy variegated kiwi, or Actinidia kolomikta, and I'll put that name with some of the other names in the description below because it doesn't exactly trip off the tongue. And it has just stayed where it is. It doesn't grow very much. We cut it back if it gets a little bit out of hand, but maybe once every 2 or 3 years. It's got very pretty foliage and it sort of just behaves itself, and it gets loads of compliments. So once you've answered these 4 questions, you'll have a short list of climbers, and from that point on you can answer the 5th question, which is what flowers do I want? I really love it when I see flowers that reflect something like a colour scheme in a garden or a front door colour or something like that. I think there's just some beautiful things. It's partly why we all love wisteria so much, is that it just looks stunning when it's out, but it is a lot of work. And I love this pink clematis, which goes with my friend Rosie's garden shed. I just think there are so many interesting and exciting things you can do with flower colour. But don't forget that flowers are really only on that climber for maybe 3 to 5 weeks a year. So you could also choose a climber for its foliage. And the 2 climbers we've got at our back door, which are the Parthenocissus henryana, the Boston ivy, and the hardy variegated kiwi, the Actinidia kolomikta, are both really there for their foliage, particularly the Actinidia. It has just these beautiful pink tinged leaves and everybody loves it. And sometimes you'll get the advice to choose a mix of climbers with different flowering times. And like lots of advice, this is very good advice, provided you actually take a few minutes to go through what it really means. Climbers with different flowering times often have different pruning times, and that means that if the climbers grow up and get entwined with each other, you won't be able to prune them at the right time because you'll be cutting away flowers from one climber before the other one flowers, and you'll accidentally take both lots of flowers with it. So either make sure that the climbers don't get entwined with each other, or choose climbers that have different flowering times but a similar pruning schedule. For example, there are many climbing roses that have to be pruned in winter or trimmed in winter, and there's also a group of clematis, including this Jackmanii that I have to be cut down to 12 inches above the ground, also in winter. So you could combine this clematis and a climbing rose very well. But it's much harder to combine some of the other climbing plants. I'll put the plant names in the description below because they're not that easy to read when you see them on the screen. And if you'd like more tips, ideas and inspiration for your middle-sized garden, then do subscribe to the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.